Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, live today on Wednesday, June the 19th. And on today's show, I thought we'd do a little bit of some more what-if situations, predicting and projecting what could happen in some of these scenarios I have laid out here on today's show. We're going to start off with the Pittsburgh Steelers, talking about Najee Harris being essentially on the last year of his contract, what could look like for him and the Pittsburgh Steelers to potentially negotiate a contract extension. Then later on, with Higgins now essentially on the last year of his deal with the Cincinnati Bengals, what are some ideal landing spots for him if he were to move on after this year or through a trade? And as well, we're going to talk about the Philadelphia Eagles. What's the one thing they could change about their offense that could unlock it finally and look more like it did back in 2022 when they made the Super Bowl? All those topics and more on today's show. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And also, if you have any questions or comments you want to make, please use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. By using that link, I can see your question or comment and address it and just get your guys' thoughts on anything I say, any perspective you guys can give on my comments or any of the topics on today's show will be greatly appreciated. And also, it's a massive help for the network as well. So if you could, please use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. But now we can move on to the first topic on today's show. How likely is a contract extension for Najee Harris with the Pittsburgh Steelers? If you weren't aware, last month I talked about it a little bit. It was the fifth-year option deadline for all teams in the NFL to decide whether or not they were going to pick up those fifth-year options on the players that had it available to them. And obviously, the Pittsburgh Steelers declined it on Najee Harris. They didn't seem ideally that this would be a wise move as of right now, so they declined it, really taking away that additional year they had as an option if they really wanted to get a contract extension done. That is now out the window. So this year becomes the final year on Najee Harris's rookie contract. And it is a little bit questionable because if you look at other fifth-year options, I think the wide receiver ones are set at about $21 or $22 million guaranteed. I think the quarterback one might be around 25, maybe a little bit more. So if you look at the running backs and their fifth-year options drafted in the first round, they're only guaranteed about $6.79 million or $7 million in that fifth year. So it really wasn't so much of a money thing. And with Najee Harris and how pivotal he has been for the Steelers, some people would also bring up the point that he is the first player in franchise history to rush for 1,000 yards in each of his first three seasons in the NFL. So he's put up the production. It's not really a money thing compared to the other fifth-year options. So why was this the choice made by the Pittsburgh Steelers? Well, it does become a little bit risky now with Najee Harris becoming a potential free agent next offseason in 2025. But General Manager Omar has really tried to calm things down around this whole situation, not giving up on the idea that the Steelers could still, and he's right, could still try and sign Najee Harris to an extension before this season officially starts. He mentioned it on a radio interview over the last few days, saying, "It was a business decision that we had to make by, I think it was May 2nd. Najee's awesome to have around here. Love Najee as a player and a person. And just because we didn't pick it up, that doesn't exclude us from doing something with Najee for the long term." So he's keeping all options open like most teams would with Najee and how prolific he has been for them. I would certainly like the Steelers to keep him around, but that's just me. And according to more sources, specifically ESPN's Brooke Pryor, she feels that Pittsburgh wants to see how Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren perform in this new offense around Arthur Smith and how his new ideas will be implemented through the running game. Obviously, you saw how much they ran the ball in Atlanta and how, efficient it was all in all. Maybe if their offense wasn't perfect and wasn't always pretty, the running game always looked as prolific as always. And the Steelers want to get a good feel of what that would look like with Najee and Jaylen Warren. But the biggest hurdle with doing that is that would require them to not sign Najee Harris to an extension before the regular season, and the Pittsburgh Steelers have it as an organizational policy, just a part of their tradition, a rule, so to say, that they have, that they don't do contract negotiations during the regular season. That's how it's been with the previous general manager in Kevin Colbert. Omar Khan really likes that rule, so he's not going to change it. So that's really what everyone's expecting to happen again this year. So if no extension is reached with Najee Harris before the regular season, he could most likely be on his way to hitting free agency unless they make the first ever exception for Najee Harris, which might seem unlikely, but I think the Steelers really like Najee. I think they've tried to talk him up a lot over the last few years, especially with Mike Tomlin. Not that he needs talking up, because he could just produce on himself, and he performs very well as a player. He makes a good case for himself. He doesn't need other people to talk him up. But what I was getting at is it feels like Mike Tomlin has really praised the player, the leadership aspect of Najee, how mature he is, how much of a pivotal player he is to the locker room, more so maybe than he is on the field, because everybody knows, like I said, how good he is on the field. It seems like Mike Tomlin has really put Najee Harris into this group along with Cam Hayward, the Minka Fitzpatricks, and those sort of guys, TJ Watt, those sort of guys that really lead and are the example for the Pittsburgh Steelers and all their players. I don't think you do that if you don't really want him to stay around. So there's that aspect of it. And then you get down to the price of it. You know, the running back market hasn't been the most favorable for all these guys, and Najee Harris has been one of the main voices in speaking out about the devaluation of running backs so far in the NFL. So if he feels so strongly about it, many people will start to believe that he'll want to get himself paid probably around 10, maybe even more than that in a average annual salary for a running back. And are the Steelers comfortable with giving that amount of money to a running back? Are they comfortable doing that with the way the market is going right now? It would really be a step in the other direction based on what everybody else is doing. So that's another big thing that the Steelers have to monitor and really decide. And if it were up to me, and if the question is, like, will a deal get done before the start of the regular season? Can we expect a contract extension for Najee Harris? It really comes down to Najee and Cam Hayward in a way, because I feel like those two guys, like I just mentioned them, are really in the group of the leaders of this team. Maybe more so Cam because he's been there longer, but Najee also is starting to be that more mature player, having more of a voice in that locker room. So you almost don't want to put them against each other, but I don't really know too specifically if the Steelers can fit them both in to accommodate also what kind of price that both of these players feel that they deserve. So there's one aspect of it. And if I had to decide, maybe I would keep Najee over Cam, just because I think the running back duo that they have with Jaylen Warren and Najee, I think, is very special. Not a lot of teams had that really before them, and I think once you saw the Steelers sort of bringing it back a little, then you see more teams start to implement it a little bit more, with the Lions doing it, with the Chargers now doing it with Jim Harbaugh. The 49ers are trying to do it a little bit more, or they should, not to overdo it with Christian McCaffrey. But those are just some teams. The Ravens, obviously, another one. But I think they're really starting something there with the running back. So I think to split that up would be one of the least Najee puts himself out there and how much he values himself at. I would give him maybe $8 to $10 million per year. I know that might seem like a lot. Like, again, we're talking about only Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, Saquon, and Josh Jacobs are the only running backs to make in the double digits on an annual salary. So to put him up there, I think he has a good case if you compare him to Josh Jacobs, and he's making that amount of money. So maybe not so much Saquon, because Saquon's done, I feel like, a little bit more for the Giants. But I don't think Najee's too far off in terms of what value he brings compared to those other guys. Maybe not so much Christian, maybe even not that much with Alvin Kamara, but Saquon and Josh Jacobs, I think he can make a good case with them just based on the production and the numbers and what they've put on the resumes so far. I think he's made a good case for himself, and you could let him hit free agency. Maybe the Steelers feel confident enough that they could let him test out the market, and for his asking price, they could feel overly confident that nobody in the market will offer him better than what they're offering. It is a major risk because you are letting other people throw out bids to Najee Harris, so there's that aspect of it, but, it is another option if the Steelers can't get anything done. If they really feel confident that what he's asking for, no other team will give other than them, or have a better offer than the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think they could try to do it. But again, that's a really, really risky thing if you really don't feel like getting rid of Najee Harris or moving on from him. They drafted a running back this year out of Georgia. It was Dajon Edwards. So I don't know. If you could put the trust in him, maybe you feel more comfortable about him, but I don't know too much about him right now to feel in a good spot to where I can say, yeah, they should do that. And it finally, for this first segment, it doesn't really send a great message to Jaylen Warren. If you already have this great running back duo going on, the offensive line's getting better, and Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris, I feel, are pretty close. It doesn't send a good message to Jaylen because Najee's put up all the numbers you would want. He's been a pivotal piece. He's been there through this rebuild that the Steelers have gone through, and he still hasn't earned himself a contract with the team. I don't think it sends a great message to Jaylen, and he might feel a certain way about that. So a lot of factors to consider here. The Steelers certainly have a big player, a big important player that they have to deal with here in Najee Harris. I think I would give him the extension. Anything more than $10 million, I think would certainly be pushing it. But if he's asking for $10 to $7 or $8 million per year, depending on how long it is, I think I would give it up. I would think he's earned that for what he's done for the Steelers up until now, on and off of the field as well. So let me know what you guys think about that and the running back market overall in the comments section. But we're going to move on and take a quick break before we come back and talk about some wide receivers, specifically T. Higgins, and what the market could be looking like for him. What are some potential landing spots I would love to see T. Higgins potentially make in 2025 or this year if a trade is figured out? Stay tuned to find out those teams and why I think T. Higgins would make a perfect fit for them in just a few seconds. We'll be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Jumping right back in, right into the next segment, potential landing spots for T. Higgins. Higgins was signed to the franchise tag this past weekend, so he is going to be at training camp. Probably 90% is the likelihood that he's going to be at training camp, because why else would he sign it and still not show up and just lose money on purpose? So T. Higgins is finally going to make an appearance with the Cincinnati Bengals this year, but I still don't really feel like anything's going to get done. It's been too long. I think everybody in the NFL really knows it too. If anything, no one's really putting in a bid, at least from my knowledge on reading a bunch of stuff about T. Higgins. No one's really putting in a bid right now because they feel like they're just going to have to wait this whole situation out until T. Higgins is a free agent, and then they could just get him for free and not essentially give up anything. So we're going to take and explore a little bit more on what teams really could benefit from T. Higgins joining their team. And also the last note on that franchise tag. Teams, along with the players, have until mid-July to work out an extension, but it doesn't seem likely, obviously, at this point with T. Higgins and the Bengals having to work out a new extension for Jamar Chase in the near future, already making Joe Burrow the highest-paid quarterback in the NFL. T. Higgins can't really fit in there. It hasn't been revealed how much he would be asking for, but I would think probably north of 26 $27 million maybe for what he feels he's valued at. So that probably won't fit into any salary plans for the Cincinnati Bengals. So it's just a matter of time before he moves on. So let's look at some teams I think would really benefit from adding T. Higgins. Starting off with the Jacksonville Jaguars, as you see. Really a need for a number one wide receiver after Calvin Ridley departed. And not only did he leave, but he went within the division to the Tennessee Titans. Obviously, they gave him a lot of money, but very much a power move there by the Titans. I love it, but it really stinks for the Jacksonville Jaguars to lose your number one within the division. There's also the Clemson connection there with his former quarterback in Trevor Lawrence. That would be already a huge step ahead of really learning how to catch passes from a whole new quarterback. If you already have some experience with a really good quarterback in Trevor Lawrence, I'm not changing my position on how much he's worth. He is pretty good. He's not worth $55 million, but regardless of that, still a good connection there from the past in college. And also, there is a really good opportunity that I was thinking about here with the AFC South. There's the Houston Texans right up here, and then it seems like all the other teams are a little bit down below, trying to figure out everything. There's a lot of newness going around. No real indication on who really is that solidified number two team or that team that could really compete with the Texans talent-wise, personnel-wise. So if you add T. Higgins to this team, I think it really propels them to at least that number two spot solidified and keeping them there to at least put up a better fight against the Houston Texans, because I think the Texans right now are the clear-cut number one in that division, and not only that, solidified themselves as AFC contenders overall. So they have a good opportunity here if they add T. Higgins along with Gabe Davis and that offense that they're trying to figure out how to put together with Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram. It would look a lot better with T. Higgins. You have a nice young core there for the foreseeable future, next 4 years for however long T. Higgins is there. You already have Trevor Lawrence for the next 4. I think that would be a great fit in Jacksonville. Then you move on a little bit more, still within the AFC in general, and you look at the Buffalo Bills, a very similar situation with the Jaguars. Their number one receiver moved on, but their identity has sort of shifted a little bit, trying to run the ball a little bit more, in my opinion, with James Conner using Josh Allen's build and just his ability to also run a lot more. A lot of play action, incorporating Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox some more. So they're changing their identity a bit more, but I think adding T. Higgins, if you pair him up with Keon Coleman, then also Dalton Kincaid, I was a really big fan of what I saw from him last year. I'm forgetting the name of their other receiver, the only receiver that stayed, but regardless of that, Higgins, Keon Coleman, and Kincaid already is a massive big three and an elite big three for the Buffalo Bills. And I got a comment here from my guy Eric. What do you think about Indianapolis? He'd be a number one for Anthony Richardson. I was close to putting the Indianapolis Colts on here, but I really like what they did, honestly, in free agency and in the draft. I love the addition of A.D. Mitchell, bringing back Michael Pittman. Josh Downs is very good. Not a lot of people know about him, but he's a very solid rookie they had from last year. I mean, it wouldn't hurt, certainly, to add T. Higgins. If they could add T. Higgins, that would be certainly another one. But just with the Bills, the Jaguars, and even the Commanders that I'm going to get to, I felt that the Colts almost already had a number one in Michael Pittman and A.D. Mitchell. I'm very high on A.D. Mitchell, too. Whereas the Bills, the Jaguars are trying to figure out their situation right now. And now moving on to the Commanders, they also have a number one, but other than that, it drops off more than it does with these other situations. If you look at Terry McLaurin, I think it's been long overdue for him to finally have someone to take a little bit of the pressure off of him. And if you bring in T. Higgins to pair him up with Terry, not only does it help the team and Terry specifically, but also you have a rookie quarterback coming in there. How much that helps him out will be tremendously. You already brought in Austin Eckler. Brian Robinson is solid. Terry's obviously there still, like I mentioned before. You add another weapon to that team, and then they're also, similarly to the Jaguars, solidifying themselves, in my opinion, as competing for that number 2 spot with the Dallas Cowboys. And I might be jumping ahead of myself here, but I would probably even put them ahead of the Cowboys if they don't re-sign Dak or if they don't re-sign CeeDee, I think the Commanders in the next year or two could definitely be solidified as that number 2 team in the NFC East if they get a wide receiver like T. Higgins, maybe Brandon Ayuk like I talked about earlier this week. But those are those 3 teams. I have 3 more that I wanted to mention on here as well. The New England Patriots, the Los Angeles Chargers, and maybe to some people's surprise, the Chicago Bears. I'll start with the Bears because that one I think will catch more people by surprise. The Keenan Allen situation, as you see there on the screen. Keenan is on the last year of his deal. It is a big move because they traded for him, so they have to bring in that contract as well. So most likely they're going to wait to see how this year plays out. If he performs exceptionally well, they're most likely going to re-sign him, but there is that chance that, Keenan might want to move on himself, or the Bears feel like it might not be worth it in the long run, depending on how much he's asking for to extend him. So at the end of the day, if Keenan moves on, you still want to have a high-powered offense. Why not look at T. Higgins and bring him in maybe next offseason if you could get him as a free agent? Maybe trade for him this year, but I think they're pretty much set on their offense this year. So this is more of a long-term plan if T. Higgins makes it a free agency next season. And if they move on from Keenan Allen, similar build in T. Higgins, almost similar skill set that of Keenan Allen to T. Higgins. So I think would be a great fit to lose Keenan Allen, but to replace him right away with T. Higgins, I think would be certainly a great move for the Chicago Bears. Then, talking about the New England Patriots, they're very new. They're very young. It's all very uncertain what this offense is gonna look like. When is Drake May gonna start? How long will Jacoby Brissett play? How good is Jacoby Brissett gonna look in this offense? So all those questions, and the receivers aren't the most eye-catching names either. So if you bring in a guy like T. Higgins, undeniably he would be that number 1 for whoever the quarterback is in whenever he does go there. And I think ushering in that new era, it'll make it a lot easier for Drake May to have a very proven number 1 receiver who is still 25, 26 years old from the top of my head in T. Higgins. I think that would be a massive help for New England, and they also have the most salary cap room in the entire NFL. So if T. Higgins wants a lot of money, maybe looking out for himself a little bit more, he could ask for a lot more if he really wants to go to the New England Patriots, asking for maybe close to 30, 29, 28 million dollars, and the Patriots could afford it. And if they decide that's all they need, they could sign him, and that could be even better for T. Higgins as another incentive to sign for the Patriots. So the last team I have on there, I think, is almost an obvious one with the Chargers. They lost Keenan Allen. They lost Gerald Everett. They moved on from Austin Eckler, bringing in a new identity with Jim Harbaugh, some new pieces in Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnson looking all right from his rookie season, still more there to prove from him. So bringing in someone that doesn't give you uncertainty and doesn't give you nerves about whether or not are they going to perform in T. Higgins would be certainly something awesome for Justin Herbert to have a great weapon, almost similar like Keenan Allen, like I mentioned before with the Bears, to have someone of a familiar size, familiar skill set with Justin Herbert, I think will be huge. Ladd McConkey's getting a lot of positive reviews in OTAs and minicamps, so adding him to that, a young, exciting offense with some good running backs and an improving offensive line, it would really just propel them a lot quicker to where they want to be rather than making it a little bit slower, because they could say that they want to run the ball all they want and they might not need these high-profile names. But at the end of the day, when your defense, like the Chargers have, isn't really one of the top defenses and you do have to put up points, you're going to need a bona fide playmaker on your team, and I don't think they really have that yet. Maybe Ladd McConkey can become that, I don't know, but you know that you can get that in T. Higgins, and if they add that to this Chargers offense who wants to run the ball anyway, then opening it up a lot more for T. Higgins, I think it's a great match for both parties. And those are the main 6 teams. There's a lot of other teams that I could have mentioned as honorable mentions. I'll just say them, like the Arizona Cardinals, pairing T. Higgins up with Marvin Harrison. The New York Giants also pairing Malik Neighbors with T. Higgins, I don't think would be too crazy. Like you mentioned, Eric, the Indianapolis Colts are another option. A lot of teams, oddly enough, need a receiver or two. I could throw the Steelers in there, but I don't think T. Higgins, the Bengals would trade with the Steelers, maybe in free agency next year, but I find that highly unlikely. So there's a lot of teams that quite frankly need someone like T. Higgins, but only one of these teams is going to get him. I think these are the main 6 that are in contention for acquiring T. Higgins at some point, because I will stress again, I don't think he's going to stay with the Bengals. I think he's going to move on. So where he lands is going to be very exciting to keep predicting where he will, but I expect it to be one of these teams. Let me know who you guys think is the best fit for T. Higgins in 2024 or potentially waiting a year in 2025. But that is all for that segment. We're going to continue on with the show and move on to our next break. And when we return, we're going to talk some more about the Philadelphia Eagles and how they're changing their offensive scheme a little bit more with Kellen Moore coming in there as the offensive coordinator, and how it'll open up this offense even more than it did in 2023. Stick around to find out how Kellen Moore will do that. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Back here now on the show to talk some more now in the NFC about predicting what this Eagles offense can look like in 2024. Where I thought the biggest issue with the Eagles last year was their defense. I thought they made more mistakes on that side of the ball. Their offense wasn't totally faultless or flawless in what they produced out there on the field, especially when you talk about the lack of pre-snap movement, which is what we're going to talk about in this segment. Since the NFL in the last few years has become so enamored with offense, high-scoring games, more so favoring the offense than the defense, it has naturally evolved into seeing a lot more pre-snap motion, a lot more deception, tricking the defense, showing them something, and then quickly moving out of it at the last second, changing coverages up. It all really is very hard when you look at it and thinking about being involved in that. It seems extremely hard, but if you look further into that and how naturally it has evolved into more pre-snap movement and more deception, you look at some teams that are very successful with it, like the 49ers, who of their offensive plays had a player in motion before the snap. That was up there at 70%. You look at the Kansas City Chiefs also at 60% in offensive plays that had a player in motion before the snap. Both of those teams were in the top 4 of having, a player in motion before the ball was snapped, and obviously both of them, no secret, they were in the Super Bowl. Not to say that that was the main reason or only reason why, but it's certainly, there is a little bit of a connection there between the motion and how their offenses are looking compared to the Philadelphia Eagles, because in terms of talent, in all honesty, right now it's hard to say that another team is 100% more talented than this Eagles team. If you look at Saquon, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, Jalen Hurts, all these guys, I just named 5 to 6 players right there. I don't think any offense just in the NFC or just in the NFL alone can name the type of quality and quantity that the Eagles have at those positions and really go toe-to-toe with them. So why did this offense look so poor in 2023? Well, it has to do a lot with that motion, like I mentioned, and they brought in Kellen Moore this offseason to try and change that a little bit, because under the offense of Brian Johnson last year and almost Nick Sirianni as well, it really didn't look very smooth, very much like everybody was on the same page. There was a lot of just confused looks out there, errant throws by Jalen Hurts, and it very much stuttered especially once they got to the red zone. It didn't look as efficient as it did in previous years. So I thought I'd compare it a little bit, look more into the situation between Kellen Moore and his offense compared to Nick Sirianni and what they were doing last year with Brian Johnson. If you look at here, some of the things I wrote down on the screen, under Nick Sirianni, the Philadelphia Eagles, 26% of the time had a player that went in motion 26% of the time. That was last in the NFL last season, and they were the only team that had a player in motion that was under 30% of their offensive plays. So there's one thing, there's that, and there's also the fact that since Nick Sirianni became the head coach and almost has had a big impact on how this offense has been run, Philadelphia has sent a wide receiver in motion on 30% of their plays, which is the fewest of any team in the NFL during that period of Nick Sirianni being the head coach. The NFL average during this time of Sirianni being in charge of the Philadelphia Eagles has been at as high as 47%, and also has increased even last year at 48% of the time seeing a player go in motion across the NFL. The average of seeing that has been nearly half of the time of the entire offensive plays this year. You've seen a player go in motion, and that's an extremely high number. It just shows you the way the NFL is played now with a lot of offensive movement. These offensive coordinators are getting a lot more creative in trying to trick opposing defenses and trying to get guys a lot more open. Maybe not so much based on talent, but based on how they're scheming them open is a good way of putting it. And so more on this Nick Sirianni offense. With this offense not having as much motion, as much trickery and deception to it, and trying to confuse opposing defenses, it has almost become pretty stale and almost predictable. With all the talent that they have, if the opposing defense knows what you're running or you're not really doing anything to throw them off their game, if they're calling out what the play most likely is going to be before the snap and you're still calling it, all the talent could really just not intimidate the opposing defense, and you're getting all those confused looks like you did in 2023. And the amount of big plays was a big thing that really decreased from last season, or I should say from 2022 to 2023. And before I get to that, Eric, is Nick Sirianni coaching for his job? He did lose both offensive and defensive coordinators last year. That's a great point. I think he is. I think he truly is this year because of the offense not looking great last year and how much he had a voice into that, but also you're not going to move on. You know, who do you put the blame on if this year doesn't look great like it did last year? I don't think they get rid of Jalen Hurts. You're probably not going to get rid of anybody else on offense, or you're not going to try and move on from coordinators again because Kellen Moore has been a pretty established offensive mind. You brought in Vic Fangio on the defensive side of the ball. So I think just by default, Nick Sirianni has been there for a good amount of years, and the narrative mostly around this team has been that they're very talented, and maybe Nick Sirianni doesn't have too much to do with how good they look at times. So I think just by default, he might be the scapegoat here, and the team would have no other choice but to move on from him because, again, I don't think they move on from Jalen Hurts. He's been there almost the same amount of time, but to find another starting quarterback that could do what Jalen Hurts can do, and he always says the right things. He always does the right thing and looks the part of a franchise quarterback. They're not going to move on from him. So I just think that this year Sirianni is definitely coaching for his job, like you put it there, Eric. But more so on this team and how the offense just looked from 2022 to 2023. The amount of big plays that they had, down the field went down. Philadelphia had only 16 plays of 20-plus yards from Week 13 through Week 18, which was tied for 26th in the NFL during that span. And also, in the entirety of last year, they only had 7 plays of 25 yards or more down the field, which was tied for 30th in the NFL, only ahead of the Carolina Panthers. No disrespect to the Panthers, but anytime you're close in a stat to them, you're most likely not considered one of the best teams. That's just how it is. Last year, maybe the Panthers are a lot better this year, but last year, their offense, how it looked with Bryce Young, with Frank Reich, and not having as many playmakers, the fact that the Philadelphia Eagles were close to them in any statistical category with how much better their offense is, speaks a lot to just how this scheme was played out in 2023. So now Kellen Moore arrives, and if you look at him last season with the Los Angeles Chargers, he ran a top 6 offense in terms of motion, having a player in motion about 59% of the time in what he calls and how he schemes his offense. And if you go back even further than that, in 2019 through 2022, he had a player go in motion about 44% of the time with the Dallas Cowboys. And arguably, those were the beginning years and some of the most prolific years for the Dallas Cowboys in terms of offense, and how crazy some of the numbers they put up with Dak, with Zeke, I want to say too, and also towards the end of that, CeeDee Lamb. So Kellen Moore has pretty much adapted very well to this new motion offense and has done a very good job of making it look pretty efficient and very well. You can make an argument that without Kellen Moore last year, the offense for the Los Angeles Chargers could have potentially been even worse or not looked as smooth as it did because of how just dysfunctional it was. I thought he did a very good job on offense, and a lot of the time it really didn't bog down to him calling a bad play or anything. It always looked smooth, but with the lack of talent that they had there, it wasn't a great situation for him in Los Angeles. So now it's looking a bit more positive here in Philadelphia, and Devontae Smith commented on this new offense that everyone is trying to learn by saying, I think it's going to be great. Get a new style of offense around, let guys not have more freedom, but be able to do things that we weren't allowed to do last year. So I thought that was pretty interesting to use the word that they weren't allowed to last year. I thought was pretty noteworthy there. So they're pretty excited. A.J. Brown had some things to say about it. So they certainly have the talent. The good part about changing their scheme and going to more motion is that this team has to adapt, because that's how it is in the NFL nowadays. If your team is pretty much stuck in its philosophies, it's stuck in its traditions of this old school mentality, a lot of the times you don't see those teams really prospering or really considered one of the main contenders in the NFL or just in their conference in general. Very rarely do you see a team do things their own way, and they're the only team that does that, and they're still considered one of the best teams in the NFL. You have to adapt, or else you run the risk of being left behind and being stuck in this rut of just average to bad years, and you have to get out of that, especially with the talent that the Philadelphia Eagles have on their roster. I go back to that because they're too talented to limit themselves on offense by having a play caller not adapt to how the NFL is adjusting nowadays and not have all this motion incorporated in their offense. They're way too talented to not have that do that and to really just hurt themselves in that aspect. So that's another thing about it. The only negative will be that having so much motion, having so much movement before the line, everybody almost has to be in sync and on a rope. That's an expression used on defense most of the time in most sports, but with the offense now, having maybe one player go in motion and having another signal go to the other side of the field to another wide receiver, or just how the play is supposed to line up in terms of when the ball is snapped, depending on where the receiver is in his motion. There's a lot of little nuances that will take a lot more time to get used to learn, and there's definitely going to have to be more communication on this offense, and the timing is going to be pivotal to make this look as tricky, as confusing as it can be for opposing defenses. And you do run the risk of some more pre-snap penalties if one guy doesn't know the cadence or doesn't know that this other guy's going in motion or isn't lined up properly. All those little things are going to maybe pop up more if these players aren't so locked in all the time. And that's what it requires with this motion offense, and that's why not a lot of teams are as efficient in doing it. If you do it a lot, which is, the given nowadays, but you also add the efficiency onto it, that's where you get the Kansas City Chiefs, that's where you get the San Francisco 49ers, the Detroit Lions as well to a certain extent. That's where you really get to that next level of being a great football team. The Eagles certainly have all the tools to do that, but now they just have to go out, learn it, first of all, and go execute it. I think they could do it. They're very much a top contender in the NFC. I expect them to bounce back after last year, especially Jalen Hurts. I thought he had a down year, but I think this year everything's put in place for him with Saquon, with this new offense that I think is definitely going to benefit him to bounce back in 2024. Hopefully that happens. Hopefully we get some good competitive games there, but that'll be it for that segment. We're going to move on to the next break of the show, and when we return, some two new segments to talk about. We're going to go into Stephon Gilmore and where he could potentially be landing in 2024. He's been a top free agent all this time. It's been a surprise that no one has signed him. We're going to look more into that. And also the Los Angeles Rams now recently revealing through a documentary that they almost made a massive trade in the first round of the NFL draft. What was that trade and who was it with? Stick around to find out more on those two topics when we return in just a few seconds.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here now on the show to jump into this free agent talk so far that has been going on. Not a whole free agency outlook on still the top remaining free agents, but I wanted to focus in on Stephon Gilmore, who since the start of free agency to me has been an unquestionable top 10 player available for any team to come and sign him. Arguably a top 3 to 5 player in all honesty based on how he's performed all throughout this time. Being 34 and still playing to the level that he is currently, or just based off of last year for the Dallas Cowboys, I think it's been a major surprise that no one has signed him. And although you do understand why some teams might not, if they want to go through training camp, through OTAs, through minicamp, and really evaluate what they have, especially with the draft going by, you really want to put these players in the best situation to really get a feel for what you have in your locker room. And then if Stephon Gilmore is still there, you go out and sign him, which I can understand that, but I think some teams desperately need someone like Stephon Gilmore on their team that could really take them to that next step. And it was interesting because Stephon Gilmore was part of the New England Patriots, and he was obviously there at the Hall of Fame induction for Tom Brady last week, and he had some comments to make about his free agency, answering why no one has signed him or what is sort of holding this deal back. And the majority of that conversation with that interviewer was that he basically is just waiting for the right opportunity. It seems like he is in no rush at this moment to make that decision, but you had some rumors before the draft and just earlier in this offseason having him going to the Carolina Panthers because he is from that area. And I thought it was odd that the New England Patriots were also a landing spot for him, because I just thought maybe for Stephon Gilmore at this point in his career, he might not want to go to a rebuilding situation, but he did mention again in that interview at the Gillette Stadium with the New England Patriots, obviously, he said, "This is a place that I played great ball, so just letting it play out how it's going to be was really his mindset in deciding this whole thing." It seems like he's in no real big rush there, like I said, and if you look at the New England situation, because I thought that was very interesting that he didn't completely, negate that option of going there. If you look at their defensive back room right now, it's pretty much led by a rookie last year in Christian Gonzalez. I was a big fan of him. You also have Jonathan Jones, Marco Wilson, Marcus Jones, and Isaiah Bolden as some of the biggest players or the big name players on the defensive side of the ball for the Patriots in the cornerback position. And I go back to the point I mentioned in the T. Higgins segment before, that New England has the most amount of cap space, and in reality, money does talk. Money is a very good convincer in a lot of these negotiations, so they could offer Stephon Gilmore a ton of money, and that thought about maybe going to a contender, maybe playing out the last few years of his career on a Super Bowl conference championship contender could all go out the window if the New England Patriots throw $18 million salary to him, but will they be able to do that? Do they think that fits them? I don't know, but that is an option for Stephon Gilmore. Like I mentioned, at 34 years old, he played all 17 games last year for the Dallas Cowboys, and apart from Deron Bland, I think in terms of efficiency and in terms of maybe the most not eye-catching stats and eye-catching plays like Deron Bland obviously had with all those interceptions, having a guy there that's quiet, does his job, is efficient, takes away a receiver, whoever he's on, that's exactly what Stephon Gilmore is. You don't have to worry about him. You don't have to look at him. You don't have to call out any special play for him. He's going to go over there, do his job, and not say anything and just continue on the game as it is. And that's all you could ask for. And he was a major part for the Dallas Cowboys last year. It doesn't look like he has lost his step. And in terms of money and how much he's looking for, I think his resume, multiple-time Pro Bowler, Defensive Player of the Year, All-Pro selection as well, he certainly has the resume to back up any contract that he would want. I think teams should and are probably inquiring about his services as we speak. But if he were to go to New England, he would certainly bring that experience aspect and be one of the pillars of this team to usher in this new era with Gerard Mayo. But other teams that I'm liking Stephon Gilmore around more and more is a team like the Buffalo Bills. Defensively, I thought they lost more than they did offensively. That's just me. Losing Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, Tre'Davious White. Maybe you could argue that they didn't produce so much on the field anymore, but in terms of leadership, experience, locker room sort of guys, I think they lost a lot there. So bringing in a guy like Stephon Gilmore and bringing him right away to that defense, and maybe you also bring in T. Higgins, you add another receiver, you jump right back into that playoff contention period, and it's hard to find a weak spot in the Buffalo Bills if they add those two guys, but that's obviously all still in the prediction phase. So that's one team. The Jacksonville Jaguars is another, similar like with T. Higgins. Defensively, they don't have that main shutdown corner that they used to have back in their time when they made the conference championship, like a Jalen Ramsey, and how good their defense was back then. They've come a long way since that, and they certainly could use a shutdown guy. You have the Indianapolis Colts, who are very young. I think they had the youngest secondary last year, if I'm not mistaken. So adding a guy with experience like Stephon Gilmore certainly can't hurt. The Green Bay Packers are another one, more so in the contender picture of this whole situation. You have Jair Alexander, that's great. He's a shutdown guy, but opposite of him, you've sort of had this rotation going on. Last year, they had a little bit better performance defensively, so I will give them that. But Stephon Gilmore, adding him to this team, will certainly make it one of the best defenses, certainly in the NFC. Maybe you can have an argument about the entire NFL, but I would love that move. And also, just in that same division, the Detroit Lions moving on, I should say, from Cam Sutton. They brought in Carlton Davis. They had a big issue last year at corner where I felt that teams really targeted them at that position. They weren't afraid to throw at their corners, so that's obviously a missing hole there for that defense in Detroit. I like the players they drafted in Terrion Arnold and I forget the name of their second round defensive back, but he was another good player that I like. His name's just leaving my mind right now. But bringing in a guy like Stephon Gilmore to that team, how good they are already and well-rounded with Brian Branch, Jack Campbell at linebacker, Aiden Hutchinson, another great player, young player on their defense. I don't have to really talk about their offense. If Stephon Gilmore is added to that, they're certainly one of the best teams in the NFL, if not already. So those are some teams I really like Stephon Gilmore as a fit, but I don't really see this being sorted out soon, probably carrying into August, if I'm being completely honest. I think by August, by preseason, most teams, unfortunately, may have to deal with some injury, or they realize that that position isn't as strong as they originally thought, so they're going to call Stephon Gilmore more around that time, and I'm excited to see where he goes. Like I mentioned, I think he still has a lot in the tank to provide to a team, and he's going to certainly be a pillar on that defensive side of the ball. Hopefully he goes to a contender. I really want to see him in big games, making big plays that impact the outcomes of these games. But As always, let me know what you guys think. Where will Stephon Gilmore go? Where will he play in 2024? And on that note, we're going to go to the final break of this show. Sticking in the NFC, a potential hypothetical scenario that happened with the Los Angeles Rams in the draft this year. They were rumored to potentially trade up or do something with their pick, but they ended up staying put. But it's not like they didn't try. They actually tried to trade up for Brock Bowers and actually Byron Murphy. What did they offer? Who did they offer it to? I will provide those details when we return after this break. Don't go anywhere. Thank you for joining me for this last segment of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk about a major what if that could have happened in the NFL Draft. There was a lot of surprises already with all the quarterback movements, who was selected where, Michael Penix going to the Falcons, Bo Nix going to the Broncos, the slide of Quinyon Mitchell, where Brock Bowers actually got drafted. A lot of surprises, and that's where I'll start off with Brock Bowers, because the Los Angeles Rams, who had the 19th overall pick in the first round, are one of the teams that are cooperating with a 90-minute documentary this offseason called The Pick Is In, that follows some teams behind the scenes during the 2024 NFL Draft. And obviously you see a lot of the conversations, a lot of the just conference room talk that goes into making this draft. But one of the most popular clips that came from this documentary, or at least in the clips that I saw on social media from the documentary, was this potential blockbuster trade that could have happened between the Los Angeles Rams trying to work out a trade with the New York Jets and later on the Las Vegas Raiders for Brock Bowers, and also inquiring about Byron Murphy. I'll start off with that New York Jets part of this hypothetical trade, because they first wanted to offer the New York Jets the number 19th pick, the number 52 pick in the second round that the Los Angeles Rams had for the Jets' number 10 pick. But obviously, they were already having talks with the Minnesota Vikings for switching those two picks in the first round on top of other picks. And obviously, that's what wound up happening. The Jets move back to 11. The Vikings move up to 10 and select J.J. McCarthy. So they declined that first offer from the Los Angeles Rams, right? But then they kept going on. They kept pestering the New York Jets, honestly, with another trade offer to try and move up to number 11, because they really had Brock Bowers in their sights to try and surprise everybody by moving on and adding Brock Bowers to this team. Their second offer to the New York Jets for pick 11 was that the Rams would give up the number 19th pick, the number 52, number 99 for the New York Jets' 11th and 185th pick in this year's draft. But obviously the Jets declined again. They stayed put and they drafted Fashanu, the tackle from Penn State. And now with the Los Angeles Rams, they're sort of spiraling, trying to figure out how they can get their hands on Brock Bowers, obviously. They offered a trade to Las Vegas by the time pick number 13 came around, but they declined the Rams' offer of the number 19th pick, the number 52, and they declined those picks for the number 13th and the 112th pick from the Las Vegas Raiders. the Raiders end up staying put, drafting Brock Bowers. So now, what do the Rams do? Their first option is gone. Where do they look now? The sources around this situation, and just from the documentary, you can see that they actually thought about drafting Byron Murphy, the defensive tackle from Texas, but he really wasn't on the board long enough for them to make a trade offer to, I want to say, the Saints, the Seattle Seahawks, obviously, who ended up taking him, the Colts there as well. They didn't really have enough time to offer up a trade, and he didn't stay on the board long enough for them to do that. And it made sense because Byron Murphy, defensive tackle, Aaron Donald just retired, so you want an immediate replacement there, obviously. So not too surprising, but at the same time, when the draft was going on, nobody had any idea that was going on. But then they obviously ended up staying put, and they drafted Gerard Verse at the number 19th pick and used their 52nd, 155th, and 2025 second-round pick to draft Braden Fisk this year, which leads me to my next point. The main question about this entire segment and why I broke it down like I did is that, now knowing about this hypothetical trade that could have happened, does it change my thoughts at all on how this Los Angeles Rams draft went down this year? A little bit, just because I thought they hit it perfectly. I imagined them having this draft board and having Gerard Verse, Braden Fisk, Blake Corum, and I know they drafted somebody else in the later rounds that I was a fan of. I think it was Cameron Kitchens. I'm pretty sure it was Cameron Kitchens. He was also another prospect that I really liked. But I thought they had it all planned out. In my mind, I was like, wow, the Rams really hit on every draft pick and they got it all right. How did they land all these players? But now knowing that they wanted Brock Bowers, they wanted Byron Murphy, it makes me almost think that, I don't know, that they were almost trigger happy trying to move up and get some of these big name players that I don't really necessarily think they needed. With Brock Bowers, of course, he's intriguing. This generational tight end that, just imagining him next to Puka, Cooper Kupp, Tyler Higbee, Kyron Williams, yeah, it's exciting, but again, I don't really feel like that's what they needed. I know a lot of teams draft for best player available, but I'm really much on the side of drafting a player that you actually need, especially when offensively I thought they did all right with the pieces that they had. And then with Byron Murphy, okay, maybe I could see it wanting to find a replacement for Aaron Donald, but I like Kobe Turner, and in all honesty, with drafting Braden Fisk in the second round, that's tremendous value that they had, and it's a great partnership already with Gerard Verse and Braden Fisk there in that defensive line now. Very young defense, I understand that, but it has a lot of potential in this coming year and for years to come. I don't really necessarily think they needed Byron Murphy, and they could have gave up additional picks that they used on Blake Corum, on a Cameron Kitchen. So knowing that now, and really how lucky they were to not have these deals work out, because again, they didn't really need these positions and still get Blake Corum, Braden Fisk, and Cameron Kitchens. I think it worked out for the best. Luckily that the Jets and the Las Vegas Raiders didn't accept these trades, because they addressed major needs at that defensive side of the ball that I thought were more alarming than tight end and drafting a defensive tackle right away, because I liked Kobe Turner, what he produced last year, and going back to back in selecting Gerard Verse and Braden Fisk, I really liked that, and the price was just too high to move up 8 spots and take Brock Bowers away from some of those teams that were drafting earlier. That's just my opinion. I like what the Rams did this year. It's not like missing out on these trades now hinders them. Now they have to hold their heads down and really think that, oh, we missed a great opportunity here. I think it's quite the opposite, because they addressed positions that they needed. Braden Fisk really made a name for himself in the combine with how athletic he looked, really jumping himself up a lot of spots in the draft and going as high as he did. I love that pick for them. Blake Corum is going to be great alongside Kyron Williams. I think that's another great running back duo that we're going to see in the NFL. And the Rams trying to compete offensively, toe-to-toe with some of the teams that they have in the 49ers, in the Lions, in the Packers. It's going to get tough, but addressing the defensive side of the ball, I think, is a great way of going about that, just because now you can counteract those teams, and more often than not, I feel like you see defenses besting out and beating out great offenses most of the time in the NFL in these crucial games. That's just me. I thought it turned out all right for the Rams. They were pretty fortunate to have it turn out as well as they did. But again, let me know what you guys think about this potential trade. Do you think that the Rams missed a massive opportunity, or are you just as happy as I am that they didn't trade away those picks and got a massive haul back with the picks they got in the second round and in the third round? It's going to be exciting for the Rams and just in the NFC with how talented and how much better every team got. So I'm very much looking forward to that. But that'll wrap it up for us on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's show. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe, and checking out all of our other social platforms like Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok for more content. And also, for additional content on this show, you can check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the Podcast Network channel on YouTube for other variants of content around the NFL around this show. And as a final reminder, tune in at 6:30 p.m. every weekday for more discussions and NFL conversations with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you guys for joining me, and I hope to see you guys all back here again with me tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.